It was a normal morning. At least it started that way. The kind of morning where the coffee machine hums softly and the steam from the oat milk rises just the right amount to warm you up for the day ahead. I stood there, my hand wrapped around the cup, the familiar rhythm of the morning wrapping around me like an old, worn-in sweater. I had been doing this for over a decade, coming into the office, brewing my morning coffee and getting ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. It was just another day or so, I thought. Then Tommy walked in. Tommy, the son of the company's founder, the new CEO. He didn't greet me, didn't offer a smile or even a glance. It was as if I were invisible, a part of the office furniture, nothing more than a fixture in the room. He walked past me like I didn't exist, as if I hadn't spent the last 10 years of my life building the client services department from the ground up. I had negotiated over 100 contracts, trained an entire team that now sat just outside his office, but in his eyes none of that mattered. None of it. Without so much as a word, Tommy turned to me and said, "Sarah, I need to see you in my office now." His tone wasn't a request, it was a command. I froze. My mind raced. There was no way to anticipate what was coming. I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest, every step feeling heavier than the last. Tommy was the new CEO. His father had built this company, but Tommy had inherited it, along with the entitlement that came with it. He walked ahead and I followed, trying to hold on to the calm facade I had carefully crafted over the years. But as I stepped into his office, I could already feel the shift. Tommy didn't even sit down. He didn't offer any pleasantries. He simply looked at me and said, "You're fired." Just like that. No explanation, no context. His words hung in the air, flat and cold. "We don't need lazy people like you dragging this place down." I blinked. At first I thought it was some twisted joke, but then reality sank in. This wasn't a joke. Tommy wasn't joking. He was serious, and I was nothing but a casualty of his recklessness. In that moment, I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight back, to demand an explanation for this senseless decision. I wanted to ask how he could throw away everything I had given to this company, how he could take 11 years of my life and reduce it to a few careless words. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled, a calm, controlled smile that didn't betray the chaos I was feeling inside. Understood. I said, my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking. "Have a nice day, Tommy." I walked out of his office trying to hold my head high, but inside I was trembling. My colleagues watched me as I passed, sensing that something was terribly wrong. Some of them began to stand ready to ask what had happened, but I gave them a subtle shake of my head. I didn't need their sympathy. I didn't need their questions. Not yet. As I packed my desk, memories flooded my mind. 11 years. 11 years of late nights, missed holidays, crises handled while holding back tears. 11 years of building something only to be discarded without a second thought. But still, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was curious. The question nagged at me all night. Why had Tommy done this? What had prompted him to make such a reckless, impulsive decision? The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered hesitantly, and the voice on the other end sent a chill down my spine. "Sarah, it's John, the CEO. I need to talk to you." The real CEO. The man who had hired me all those years ago. And in that moment, I knew things were far from over. If you're curious to see what happens next, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Your support keeps me motivated to bring you more incredible stories. And now, here's a quick question for you. Why do you think Tommy fired Sarah so suddenly? A. He was impulsive and didn't understand the value of her work. B. He had a hidden agenda and wanted to take over everything for himself. Let us know your answer in the comments below. Your opinions matter, and I can't wait to hear what you think. The night felt endless. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Tommy had fired me without even thinking twice, without even considering the work I'd put into this company for over a decade. I had helped build the very foundation of the client services department, bringing in new clients, maintaining relationships, and negotiating contracts. And yet all of that seemed meaningless in the face of his impulsive decision. But there was something deeper. Something that gnawed at me as the night wore on. It wasn't just the shock of being fired or the injustice of it. It was the suddenness of it. Tommy hadn't given any reason, no real explanation for his actions. He didn't even seem to care. And that's what troubled me the most. Why had he done it? What had triggered such a rash decision? As I lay there, the question kept swirling in my mind, why? The next morning, I couldn't wait any longer. I needed answers. But there was more at stake than my career now. Tommy's decision had left me with a strange sense of responsibility. A responsibility not just to myself, but to the company I had helped build. The Kingswell deal. The one I had spent months negotiating was about to fall apart, and I knew it. I had been the one to establish the relationship with the client, to work through the terms, and to make sure everything was set for the final meeting. And yet, Tommy didn't even know the critical clause in my contract that made me the sole negotiator for that deal. My phone buzzed at 9 a.m. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway, my heart racing with anticipation. "Sarah, it's John! The CEO, I need to talk to you," the voice on the other end said. John, Mr. Richardson. The founder of the company was the man who had hired me all those years ago. I hadn't spoken to him in a while, not since Tommy had taken over as CEO. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew one thing: he was the only person who could help me make sense of everything that had happened. "Sarah," he continued, his voice strained, "I need you to listen carefully. What happened yesterday? It wasn't right. Tommy doesn't understand the weight of his decision." I closed my eyes, my mind racing. He doesn't understand. I thought that much was clear. Tommy had acted without considering the consequences, without understanding the work I had put into the company, and worse, without understanding the value I brought to the table. "Sarah, your contract has a clause in it," John said, his voice growing more serious. "A clause I insisted on after the last acquisition disaster. You're not just the account manager for Kingswell. You're the only authorized negotiator. Tommy can't finalize that deal without you. Not legally, not ethically, not even practically." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I froze. He was right. Tommy had no idea what he had done. He had fired me without understanding the most important part of my job, the one thing that made me indispensable to the company. I wasn't just an employee to be tossed aside. I was a key player in securing one of the company's biggest deals. And in that moment, everything shifted. The anger, the shock, the disbelief, they all faded into something else. It wasn't just about the firing anymore. It wasn't about Tommy's careless actions or the way he had disregarded everything I had built. It was about control. I had been pushed aside, yes, but I was not powerless. I was the one with the knowledge, the skills, and the expertise that Tommy had overlooked. He hadn't just dismissed me, he had created the perfect opportunity for me to take control. The realization hit me. Tommy had made a huge mistake, and now it was time to turn the tables. I stood up from my bed. My mind focused, my resolve hardening. I wasn't going to let Tommy's impulsive actions define me. I wasn't going to let him ruin everything I had worked for. I was going to go back, but not just to finish the deal. I was going back to show him and the company exactly who I was and what I was capable of. I had been fired, yes, but I wasn't defeated. Not by a long shot. The phone call from Mr. Richardson was unexpected, but in that moment it felt like a lifeline. His voice was familiar, one I hadn't heard in a while. And though there was a certain level of urgency in his tone, I could sense something deeper, something raw. "Sarah," he began, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "I need to talk to you. You've been through a lot, and I need to understand why you left so suddenly." I exhaled, feeling the tension in my chest tighten. "I was fired." I replied, the bitterness creeping into my voice despite my best efforts to remain calm. "Tommy said I was lazy, that I wasn't needed anymore." There was silence on the other end of the line. A pause that lasted far too long. I could hear papers rustling, maybe even his chair creaking as he shifted. Then he spoke again, but this time his voice was softer, more measured. "Did he read your contract?" I frowned, confused by the question. "What do you mean he must have—" "Sarah," he said slowly, "I need you to listen carefully. Tommy is supposed to finalize the Kingswell deal today. You're aware of that, right?" I nodded instinctively, despite knowing he couldn't see me. The Kingswell deal was everything I had worked for, everything the company had hoped for, the one I had built from the ground up. "Yes, we were supposed to meet them this morning," I replied. "The final meeting was scheduled." "Tommy doesn't know." Mr. Richardson's voice was firm now, tinged with disbelief. "But your contract has a clause, a very important clause, one I insisted on after the last acquisition disaster." He paused for a moment before continuing. "You are the only authorized negotiator for the Kingswell deal. Sarah, without you, that contract doesn't stand. Tommy can't close it. Not legally, not ethically, not even practically." The realization struck me like lightning. My heart skipped a beat. I stood there motionless as John's words echoed in my mind. Tommy had no idea what he had just done. He had fired me without understanding the very foundation of the company's future, without understanding that I was the one who could make or break the Kingswell deal. I thought back to the last few days, the shock of the firing, the suddenness of it, the way Tommy had brushed me aside. He hadn't even thought about the contract. He hadn't thought about the consequences of his actions. And yet now he was the one in the dark. He was the one who was about to lose everything. Sarah, John continued, his voice now filled with frustration. I need you to come back. We can't let this happen. You're the only one who can fix this. There was no anger in me. No desire for revenge. There was only clarity. Tommy had acted in haste without thinking about the long-term repercussions. And now it was up to me to make sure that this company didn't spiral because of his recklessness. I'm coming back, I said, my voice steady, filled with resolve. But not just to finalize the deal. I'm coming back on my terms. I need full control over the Kingswell account. No interference from Tommy. This can't happen again. Not to me, not to anyone. There was a moment of silence before Mr. Richardson replied, his voice full of gratitude. Done. He said, whatever you need, Sarah, it's yours. The conversation ended, but my mind was already racing. I wasn't going back as an employee who had been wronged. I was going back as a leader who had been underestimated, and now I had the power to make things right. Not just for myself, but for the company, for the people who had trusted me, for the legacy that had been built on respect and hard work. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Tommy was still the CEO after all, and his mistake wasn't something that could be undone overnight. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let his arrogance destroy everything I had worked for. I was going to fix this. And when I walked back into that office, I would do it on my terms. No one, least of all Tommy, was going to take that away from me. The next day, as I prepared to walk back into the office, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened. The situation with Tommy, the firing, the way I had been discarded without a second thought, it all felt so surreal. But now, as I stood at the threshold of the building, everything had changed. I wasn't just returning to finalize a deal. I was returning with a purpose, a clear understanding of what I had to do, not just for me, but for everyone who had been caught in the wake of Tommy's careless decision. Walking into that office again wasn't easy. The quiet whispers in the hallways, the awkward glances from colleagues, it all felt too familiar. They all knew what had happened. They knew I had been let go, and now I was walking back in. There was no avoiding the tension. But I didn't care. I wasn't here to make them feel comfortable. I was here to make sure that what had happened wouldn't happen again. As I entered Mr. Richardson's office, he was already waiting for me. His face was more tired than I remembered, the stress of the situation weighing heavily on him. But there was something else in his eyes, something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Sarah, he said, rising from his chair. Thank you for coming in. I know I've put you through a lot, but I need you to understand that I made a mistake. I trusted Tommy too quickly, too soon, and now we're both paying for it. I nodded. There was no need for a lengthy apology. The damage had been done. What mattered now was how we would move forward. I'm not here for apologies, John. I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm here because this company needs to learn from this, and I need to make sure this doesn't happen again. John looked at me, understanding written clearly on his face. I agree, and I want you to be part of that change, Sarah. You've earned that right. His words meant something. They really did. But what mattered now was action. I want full control over the Kingswell deal. I don't want Tommy anywhere near it. He's made his decision, and now he needs to live with the consequences. I want nothing to do with him in this process. John didn't hesitate for a second. Done, he said. You'll have the autonomy you need to handle it. No interference, no second guessing. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but it was only temporary. This wasn't about the Kingswell deal anymore. This was about something bigger, about rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. Tommy's impulsiveness had created a fracture in the company, and it was up to me to help fix it, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed John to step up as well. We both needed to show the team that leadership wasn't about power. It was about responsibility. I want to lead John, I said, my voice steady. I want to make sure that this company understands what true leadership looks like. I don't just want to negotiate deals. I want to reshape the culture here, starting from the top down. John listened carefully, his gaze never leaving mine. You're right, Sarah. This company needs leadership, and I trust you to provide it. I took a deep breath, knowing that this was just the beginning. I wasn't walking back into the office as the same person who had been fired just days ago. I was someone different. Someone who had learned the hard way that power doesn't come from a title. It comes from the ability to lead with integrity, to hold yourself and others accountable, and to never back down when the stakes are high. As I walked out of John's office, I didn't feel relief. What I felt was a quiet determination. Tommy had made his choice, but I was making mine. And now it was time to take control of my future and the future of the company I had helped build. No more shortcuts, no more mistakes, just action. And this time, I would be the one in charge. The next day, as I walked back into the office, everything felt different. The air was heavy with uncertainty, a strange mix of anticipation and hesitation. I could feel eyes following me, colleagues whispering behind their desks. It wasn't just the shock of me returning after being fired, it was the shift in power that had taken place. Tommy, the man who had once sat in the CEO's chair with all the authority in the world, was now a shadow of his former self. His rash decisions had created a ripple effect, and now I was here walking through the same halls, but with a completely different purpose. I didn't care about the looks or the whispers. I was here to do something bigger than finalize a deal. I was here to restore the values that had once made this company great: integrity, accountability, and respect. But I wasn't going to do it quietly. I wasn't going to slip back in unnoticed, hoping things would go back to normal. No, I was walking in like I owned the place, because in a way I did. When I arrived at Mr. Richardson's office, he was waiting for me. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no false politeness. He had made his decision, and he was fully aware of the weight of the situation. "Sarah," he said, nodding toward the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming in. I know this hasn't been easy for you, and I owe you an apology for putting you in this position. But I want you to know that I see you. I see what you've done for this company, and I see the kind of leader you are." I sat down, my gaze steady. "I'm not here for apologies, John. I'm here to make sure this company learns from its mistakes. I'm here to fix the mess Tommy created, and I won't do it by following the same broken system." John looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I know, and I'm not asking you to follow a broken system. I'm asking you to lead, to rebuild what's been lost." I nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Rebuilding was exactly what needed to happen. Tommy had come in with all the arrogance of someone who thought he could run things simply because it was his birthright. But leadership wasn't about power or privilege. It was about earning the respect of your team, understanding the work that went into building something, and knowing when to step back and let those who know best take charge. "I need full control over the Kingswell deal," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "I'm not here to be a figurehead. I need to be the one making decisions. Not Tommy. He's already made a mess of this, and I won't let that continue." John didn't flinch. "Done," he said immediately. "You'll have the autonomy you need, and Tommy won't be involved in the decision-making process for this deal. I've learned my lesson, Sarah, and I trust you to lead us through this." I could feel the shift in the air, the change that was coming. It wasn't just about a contract anymore. It was about taking back control, about ensuring that the right values were restored. And as I left John's office, I felt something else rising inside me, something stronger than before. This wasn't just a chance to finalize a deal or prove myself. It was a chance to take the reins and show everyone, including Tommy, exactly what real leadership looked like. I wasn't just returning to the company, I was returning to reshape it, to remind everyone that leadership wasn't given, it was earned, and I had earned my place. No more compromises, no more shortcuts. This time I was in charge, and the company would know that from this moment on, things would be done differently. The days after I took control of the Kingswell deal were intense. The atmosphere in the office had shifted. People were talking, whispering in corners, and casting nervous glances my way. Some were hopeful, others unsure. There was no denying the tension. Tommy had been pushed aside, suspended from any decision-making, but his presence still loomed large. The question everyone was asking: how would this company move forward after his impulsive actions nearly caused its collapse? As I sat in my office reviewing the Kingswell contract one last time, I couldn't help but think about the consequences of Tommy's mistakes. His failure to understand the complexities of our work had almost ruined everything. He hadn't cared to learn about the intricacies of the deal, hadn't respected the importance of the contract I had fought so hard to put together. His decision to fire me without cause, without any understanding of the legalities at play, had put us in this precarious position. But now, the tables had turned. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't interested in seeking revenge. Tommy had done enough damage already. What mattered now was rebuilding, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been affected by his misjudgment. I had already secured the Kingswell deal, a success that could potentially save the company from the brink of disaster. But that wasn't enough. The damage to our internal structure was deep, and it was time for a full reset. I gathered my thoughts mentally, preparing for the next phase of this transformation. It wasn't just about getting the deal done anymore. It was about restoring integrity to the company, ensuring that respect, accountability, and transparency became the foundation of how we worked from here on out. We couldn't afford to make the same mistake twice. We needed to rebuild trust, and that started with me leading by example. As I walked through the office the next morning, I could feel eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. I had nothing to prove anymore. What I had done in the past, the work I had poured into this company, was enough. Tommy's actions might have knocked me down, but they hadn't broken me. I had reclaimed my place, not just in this company, but in my own life. I entered the meeting room where the rest of the leadership team had gathered, ready to discuss the next steps. It was time to lay out the new plan. We need to rebuild. I began looking each person in the eye. We need to restore the culture that made this company great. Integrity, respect, transparency. That's how we're going to operate from now on. There is no room for shortcuts, no room for impulsive decisions that could put everything we've worked for at risk. The room was quiet as I spoke, everyone listening intently. This wasn't just a speech. This was a call to action. Tommy had ignored these values, but I wasn't going to let that happen again. The culture we built wasn't about chasing personal gain. It was about collaboration, trust, and delivering results without compromising on who we were as a company. I could see the shift happening already. People were starting to believe again. They were starting to trust the process. They were starting to trust me. And that was the most important thing. We weren't just fixing what Tommy had broken. We were building something stronger, something more resilient. The day came when Tommy finally addressed the company in a meeting with Mr. Richardson. I could see the change in him, the fear, the regret. It was clear that he had underestimated the consequences of his actions. Mr. Richardson stood in front of the room and made it clear Tommy was out of the decision-making process. His time as CEO was over, and the company would move forward without him. As I watched the fallout unfold, I didn't feel satisfaction. There was no joy in watching someone else's failure. But there was relief. Relief that the company could finally breathe again. Relief that we could start fresh without the shadow of poor leadership hanging over us. Tommy's suspension became permanent, and the official announcement was made quietly without fanfare. No press release, no lawsuits, just a quiet exit. But the word spread, and in the silence that followed, I realized something I had won. Not because of revenge or any personal vendetta, but because I had done the right thing. I had stayed true to the values that had always driven me, and in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. The Kingswell deal was a success, yes, but it wasn't the real prize. The real prize was what came next, a chance to rebuild, a chance to lead, and a chance to show the world and myself that true leadership isn't about titles or positions. It's about the strength to face adversity with integrity, to stand tall when everything around you is crumbling, and to never lose sight of who you are no matter the challenges. As the days passed and the dust of Tommy's departure began to settle, a new sense of clarity emerged within the company. The Kingswell deal had been sealed, but the work I had set out to do was far from over. Securing the deal was important. Yes, but it was only a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Rebuilding the company's culture, restoring the values that had been pushed aside in the wake of Tommy's leadership, was the true challenge. I walked into the office each day with a quiet resolve. The weight of leadership was no longer something I resented or feared. It had become my responsibility, one that I was prepared to carry. Tommy had made his decisions out of haste, out of arrogance. But those mistakes were now ours to undo. I could feel the shift, not just in how people treated me, but in how they treated one another. There was a new energy in the air, a desire to move forward to fix what had been broken. My first order of business was to set the tone for how things would be moving forward. We had to reestablish trust, not only in leadership, but in the way we worked together. The company had always prided itself on teamwork, on collaboration, but Tommy's reign had fractured that unity. People had been pushed out, ignored, and belittled. Now it was time for those wounds to begin healing. I called for a series of meetings with each department, not just to discuss the logistics of our future, but to listen. I wanted to hear from everyone what had gone wrong, what could be fixed, and how we could restore the sense of purpose that had once driven us. Each conversation was a chance to reaffirm the values that had been forgotten. Integrity, accountability, respect. These weren't just words to me. They were the foundation of everything I had worked for. And it was clear that they needed to be the foundation of what came next. The more I listened, the more I realized just how deeply Tommy's actions had affected everyone. People who had once been outspoken and full of ideas were now quiet, hesitant. They had lost confidence, not just in leadership, but in the company itself. I could see the hesitation in their eyes, the uncertainty in their voices. They needed reassurance. They needed to know that they mattered, that their work mattered. I made it my mission to show them, not with grand speeches or promises, but through actions. I began to delegate more, to trust them with decisions. I created an open-door policy where everyone could come to me with their concerns, their ideas, their frustrations. It wasn't just about getting the work done anymore. It was about rebuilding the culture of mutual respect and collaboration that had been lost. At the same time, I knew that the biggest obstacle was Tommy himself. Even though he had been removed from the decision-making process, he was still a presence in the office, and that presence lingered. His actions had left behind a trail of doubt and resentment, and those feelings didn't disappear overnight. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine. There was still work to be done to mend the fractures that Tommy had caused, and that work would take time. But I was committed. I was committed to the company, to the people who had stayed loyal, even in the midst of uncertainty, and to the legacy we were going to create together. We couldn't undo the past, but we could shape the future. As the weeks went by, I could feel the shift becoming more permanent. Employees were beginning to speak up again, share ideas, and take ownership of their work. The Kingswell deal, though, it had been the catalyst for all of this, was just the beginning. We were embarking on something far greater, an opportunity to rebuild, to reinvent, and to prove that leadership could be about integrity, not ego. And while Tommy's departure had left a void, it had also given us something invaluable, the chance to show what we were truly capable of when given the space to thrive. What we built together from the ground up would be something none of us could take for granted. The company was no longer defined by its mistakes. It was defined by its potential. We had a long road ahead, but as I looked around the office at my team, I knew we were on the right path. The days following Tommy's suspension were a mixture of uncertainty and hope. The office had been quieter than usual, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. While the Kingswell deal had been successfully finalized, the true test of our company's future was just beginning. The road to recovery wasn't going to be quick or easy. We had a lot of work to do, work that went far beyond the deal itself. The tension in the office had begun to dissipate, but it wasn't over yet. I knew that Tommy's actions had caused more damage than we could fully understand in the moment. His leadership had been reckless, and while I had taken control of the situation, the underlying issues he had created wouldn't vanish overnight. The company needed to heal, and I needed to lead that healing process. I spent my days in meetings, conversations, and quiet reflections. I needed to understand how deep the wounds ran, how much trust had been lost. Some employees had been with the company for years, watching as Tommy made decisions that alienated them. Others were newer still, trying to find their place in a company that seemed to change with each passing day. I realized that the challenge ahead wasn't just about fixing processes or reorganizing teams. It was about rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. It became clear to me that leadership wasn't just about taking control. It was about showing up every day, being consistent, and earning the trust of those who had been hurt. I didn't need grand gestures or flashy speeches. What I needed to do was lead with empathy and authenticity. I needed to create a space where people felt safe again, where they knew their voices would be heard and their contributions valued. One of the first steps I took was re-engaging with the team. I held regular check-ins with department leaders, not just to review work, but to hear from them what were their concerns. What could I do to make their jobs easier? It was easy to forget in the middle of a crisis that the people around me were feeling the effects of Tommy's decisions too. They needed reassurance. They needed to see that the company's values weren't just words, they were principles I was determined to uphold. But there were challenges ahead. While the internal environment had begun to stabilize, the external challenges didn't disappear. Tommy's departure had sent ripples through the industry, and competitors were starting to circle, hoping to capitalize on the company's perceived weakness. I knew that in order to truly move forward, we had to prove ourselves not just internally, but to the world outside. We had to show that our success wasn't built on a fragile foundation. We had to demonstrate that our strength came from our values, our people, and our ability to adapt and evolve. The final push came during a board meeting when I was presented with a proposal for future growth. The Kingswell deal was just the beginning, but it was clear that we had an opportunity to not just recover, but thrive. As I looked around the table, I saw faces that were no longer unsure. There was confidence in the room, a shared belief that we could take this company further than it had ever gone before. It wasn't just about securing deals or expanding the business, it was about creating a legacy of leadership that was rooted in respect, collaboration, and trust. We weren't going to be defined by the mistakes of the past. We were going to define our future by the values we embraced moving forward. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in weeks. The hard work wasn't over, but the journey was no longer a lonely one. We were all in this together, and I was no longer just a leader by title. I was a leader by action. And that was something far more meaningful. The company had endured, and it had emerged stronger than before. The lessons we had learned the hard way would guide us in the years to come. And as I walked through the office once again, this time with a sense of purpose and resolve, I knew that the true victory wasn't in how we had weathered the storm, but in how we had rebuilt ourselves after it. And that rebuilding was just the beginning. As we continue on this journey of growth and transformation, your support means the world to me. If you found this story inspiring or if it resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback is invaluable, and it helps me create more content that matters to you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay updated with future stories and insights. Your support keeps me motivated, and together we can build a community of strength and resilience. Thank you for being part of this journey.